I love this slide because I created it, but also because I think it encapsulates a lot of the stuff that we're talking about.
It is March 5th, Effective Document Management Strategies for Microsoft 365, the Intranet edition. So that's where we are today. The gang is all here, and so we're ready to get rolling. And today we're doing the third episode in this Effective Document Management Strategies series. And this one is sort of similar, but different enough that we wanted to highlight it. So we're going to start with our problem statement like we've been doing for these episodes. We're going to talk about the separation of content and permissions, the democratization of the process, pages versus documents workflow, because in this case, pages become potential content. And then I'll have some time at the end, if we have time, to talk about a customized approval and publishing workflow. All right. So let's get started with the problem statement. The idea here is that in an intranet where you have content on that intranet that is for mass consumption normally, you need to have a place where you can work on it with your core team of people who are going to revise that content and then be able to publish it out for everyone to view. So in that case, we can have problems where content revisions can be ongoing and not match the current published version. So having those things in the same place could be very tricky. You don't want to be in the middle of revising something that everybody can read, right? People may need to review the work in progress, but not modify it. So that's often an issue with an approval workflow where you want to have people have read access to something, but not edit access to it. Both the work in progress and current versions have value, but to different people. So from the search perspective, we want people to find content. It might have value to them, but you don't want everyone to have everything, right? And then content, a problem could happen in that content could be published before it's ready. And so we need to be able to manage that. So these are all sort of the problem statements around that idea that we have content we need to publish for mass consumption in our organization. And so we're going to start with Patrick, and he's going to sort of talk us through what the separation of content and permissions means in more detail.
So, I mean, we've talked about this in the past couple of sessions as well, but we really kind of wanted to hone in a little bit here on some of the differences and how that comes into play when we're talking about teams and channels versus the intranet, and where that information that everyone needs to consume is available. So of course, we've been talking about content all in one library and how that can come to effect on the intranet. Having one library makes it very difficult for permissioning in terms of, while we can permission individual documents, we really don't want to. We want to try to keep that at a higher level, because then we just end up with a mess with the permissions. And then if someone shares it and things like that happen, then no one really knows what happens to that document. It very quickly becomes a junk drawer of permissions. So one of the things we wanted to talk about here is separating that content in terms of when it's being reviewed or created, it's in the team site where we can have those permissions a little bit more locked down. When it gets to be a final version, then it gets uploaded to the intranet or the public site for everyone to see. Generally speaking, we always advise that that is your final PDF version. Again, we're talking about being able to make changes and stuff. When you upload a PDF, it's harder for people to accidentally insert a capital W in the middle of a sentence.
Or if they only have read permissions, download it and make modifications and then put it somewhere else too, right? Yeah.
Is that where that capital W came from, Patrick?
It was me. I apologize. There's other hidden unicorns in there. I'm just not going to mention it to you.
Our Easter eggs.
Yeah, exactly. So content in collaboration spaces. So we're here again, we're talking about more of those teams or the lockdown sites. You can limit that depending on how you're working with people, whether it's a working group, as wide as a department, or you can do a private channel. So within your department, say all your management has to look at the reviews of the employees or something like that. You can create a private channel and lock that down so people can actually get in there and comment and feed it, provide feedback, but not necessarily everyone can see it. Only those who are working in the team or have permission to the team would see content on a broader scale for the department. Again, just to reiterate, when it's published on the internet, it means permission is open to all to read it. It is read-only generally, so they can't make changes to it or things like that. The beauty of this is that it does keep that information separate. So your intranet does become the source of truth. It means that if the document is there, it is the final version, it is the most current version. We no longer have to put, updated January 2025 at the end of the file, because people will know that that is indeed the most latest and greatest version. But keeping that in mind, or stemming from that, the public version should always have a simple generic name. So if it is the PTO policy for 2025, it just says PTO policy. Same thing for where we see this a lot is open enrollment. There's always an open enrollment 2023, open enrollment 2024, open enrollment 2025. Whereas if you just leave it open enrollment and update it, you can track the version history, which is great. But people also won't get confused about what that information is.
Yeah, I think that one source of truth, you can, if you don't have any kind of date-related information in the name of the file, it becomes sort of a common enough thing that people then just trust that that's the most latest and most updated thing. So for sure, that's a good, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say another thing about sort of the simple and generic names is that for things like benefits guide or PTO policy, if you have quick links to those documents on specific pages and those documents change year over year, you don't need to go update 10 pages with that quick link on it, because those won't update if you upload a new version or a new, benefits guide 2025.
100%, totally 100%.
I can't wait for my section so I can beat all of these things to death.
Yeah,
I'm gonna talk about all of them again.
We are going to talk about all of them again. We're having an interesting side conversation on the private channels, and we did cover that in a previous episode, so I won't go into it again. But Mark, democratization of process. That's sort of that's more information, new information on this topic, so you're not repeating yourself.
Yeah, there's some repetition here, but not too much. Patrick covered things so well. So one of the things that we realize is, and we've worked on so many intranets, is that every group of people has their own way of thinking about, well, how do we, start a piece of content, work our way through editing it, decide that it's done, who needs to sign off on it, how important is this to our general scheme of things, and ideally that kind of those differences should live in the places where that team or department or set of people do their thing. So for each work group, each department, it could be a project you're working on, whatever, you have your own process to decide how you generate content and when it's done. So that process should be independent of the publishing gesture to the intranet. When you're done, say, right, maybe every department has policies, but they all put them through slightly different processes. They're following a good template. They're following some consistent processes, but they also have, in HR, they have 4 people sign off. In finance, nobody signs off because finance doesn't want to bother. So that's fine. When you're done with that process, you publish it to the intranet by making a copy. we always talk about how there should only be one version of the truth, so that making a copy feels as if it's a violation of that rule.
Right.
And it isn't, because you've got that published version that everyone is consuming, here's what this benefit's all about, whatever it is. And then the working version in your team site is essentially the pre-version 2, right? It's the work in progress at all times. It may have a crazy file name. It may be in 6 folders deep, because that's how your team works. But it's there so that your team has the original. In most cases with files that we publish to the intranet, you'll be working on a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something in your team site, and you'll publish a PDF. So it's not actually the same document in a sense. Even when it is, and you're publishing that same Word document, think of it as, this is the published version. This is our next work in progress version. The nice thing about that, the reason the title is Democratization of Process, is each team gets to decide how that all works. Again, adhering to any, general rules, processes are this kind of thing in our organization. This is the format we want to use. But, the wording in a particular paragraph is up to that particular team.
Yep, totally agree with all that.
Good.
Moving on. So moving on. Oop, a build slide. Uh-oh.
Yeah, you can build it all the way if you want. So this is a slide I stole directly from the management of content competency in the maturity model for Microsoft 365. I love this slide because I created it, but also because I think it encapsulates a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And if you think about it, this is the same thing you go through in your real life in lots of different ways. You create something, you iterate it on a little bit, you review it, you go back the next day and you read it, even if it's just you. This could be your grocery list, for God's sakes. Then you publish it by putting in your pocket to go to the grocery store. You use it in the store, and then you realize, oh, well, I put it in the wrong order because the produce is over here, and so the next time I'm going to create it a different way. It's really a process we use in a lot of our lives. So if you think about how you're working on content for your intranet, that creation step could be in somebody's OneDrive. I think we should have a policy about this, but I'm afraid to show my boss because I'm not ready for it yet. But you copy it into the team site when you're iterating on it. You put it through whatever that review process. You publish it by making a copy. It's in the communication site. The reason this is level 400 for management of content is that you actually have a way to collect feedback, and you have a way to act on that feedback. Lots of times people just publish stuff and then figure, well, we're done. But if people don't understand something, or there's a spelling mistake, Patrick put a W somewhere in the middle of something, you want to be able to fix this stuff and go through that same cycle again. Sometimes it's an accelerated cycle, sometimes it's a long cycle. So I think that this picture is often very helpful, because it's, where do I do it and where does it go? And you notice that SharePoint sites and OneDrive is down at the bottom right, Team site is on the bottom top left. And each instance in your organization might work a little bit differently, but it's still this process, and your grocery list is still in your pocket. Yes, I still do. Here's my list for today. It's a note card.
All right. We're going to have the Filename Matter conversation a little bit more deeply, I guess.
Yeah, because I said I want to beat it to death. So if you're working in your teams, in your team space, team site, in Teams, and you've got ridiculous file names like this is one of the things I talk about in my information architecture sessions. I stole it from Louise Fries, and I just think it's brilliant. We see file names like this all the time. And within a team site, hey, if that's the way you want to work, that's great. But to SharePoint, if you put a 2 at the end of that final, it's actually not the same file, right? You might end up with 15 files here, half of which you've emailed around, you know that drill. Ideally, you're using a simpler file name structure. All of that is metadata that you'd like to actually track in a different way. But when you publish something to the intranet, it should have a very clear name. So in this case, Project Death Star Master Plan. That sounds like the thing it is. And you'll notice that it's also a PDF. So it's not, even if that file name that in the top section is what you've named it inside your team site, you're publishing it with a name that makes sense. I can't tell you how many times I've gone onto intranets and found, 6 or 8 of the top level files that are actually almost the same thing, but not, like what was it? Open Enrollment 2024, Open Enrollment 2023. They're the same, but they're not the same. And it's just another burden to have to clean up. So keep your file names very, very simple.
Well, and another burden for the users trying to find the right thing.
Absolutely.
The problem I think that happens here is if you're part of the working group that's working on them, those multiple file names probably don't bother you very much. But when you're a new person coming in, or a person who has to review, or whatever reason you're seeing that list of multiple files, you have no idea where to start. And that sort of happened with us pretty recently. And so it's definitely something to try to avoid. Although I think certainly, at least for our Gen Xers and older, this is something that we're having a hard time stopping, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, generally, if you're
if
you're doing the thing at the top, you should stop doing that thing on the top. We did it that way because of the way the technology used to work. Right.
But breaking ourselves of that habit, even us, cobbler's children type of thing, it's sometimes tricky. But yeah, in my opinion, if we could stop doing it everywhere, even on collaboration spaces, it would be much better. More on this, or should we move on? Ooh, we're all quiet
Keep
today.
rolling.
Come on, where's some
Keep
banter?
rolling.
Let's go, people.
I can talk about this some more if you want.
It's up to you. I can give Derek the floor, though. Should we do
Thank
that?
you. Next.
I
think so. Let's move on.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Derek, you got the floor.
All right. So Mark was talking about that sort of workflow where things originate in your SharePoint site, in your team site, and they migrate up to your communication site. And the one thing that I thought of when we were fleshing all this out is that is a very document-centric approach. If you have a document, that can be done in your team site, but a page of content can't necessarily, unless it's a document to begin with. So I wanted to kind of tease those two things apart. So from a publishing workflow perspective. So for documents, obviously, as Mark said, they should start in your team site, in your collaboration site, and then that final version should move to the intranet when it's ready, when it's published. In general, a lot of those things start out as Office documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever, and then they move out to PDFs when they go out to the intranet. Those processes are dependent on each individual team's business needs. So you can do what works for your group. You can build in approvals and notifications within your team site. Julie had mentioned very early on having that ability to sort of review a document, approve a document based on the newest version. A lot of times we'll see this type of thing for things like policies, where someone writes it, someone edits it, but then somebody else needs to review it and approve it before it's ready to go. You can also leverage, these are like tried and true document library settings, but you can leverage major and minor versions. So you can have minor versions of a document, until it's ready to be version 2 or version 3 or whatever it happens to be. Now, from a publishing process, generally we would recommend that you just drag the PDF over or save it and move it over manually. It's really the most efficient way. But if you have a large organization that's doing a lot of processing, you can build an automated process with either Power Automate or with customizations to do that yourself and do it automated. Now, from a page perspective, those documents, Julie, you can go, yeah. The documents, those are starting, like I said, in your team site and moving up to your intranet site. Page content, you can't do like that. So for instance, if you have an employee handbook that you've split up into different pages, we recommend this quite a bit. And those need to be reviewed and updated and edited. That's not something you can do from your team site. So you have to really do that in place. And this is true for both page and news publishing. Those are all pages. Now, back in the day, and this is one of the things that I really, really miss about the old publishing model, is we had the ability to schedule when a page could go up and schedule when that page could come down. And I really miss that. But we do have the ability now to set when something is published. We just don't have the way to take it down unless we build some kind of automated process. But essentially, for page publishing, you would have to use the save as draft option when you're making your edits. And so that things weren't don't get accidentally published, because that has happened to me quite a few times. But when you save as draft, anybody in the team who has edit permissions has the ability to go in and see whatever those changes are. They're going to see the latest version, which is that point version. One of the things that you can do that they did add was an automated page approval workflow. So with just a couple of clicks, you can use Power Automate to set up page approvals in your communication sites. And that way you don't automatically publish. And I already mentioned that we don't have a way to unpublish. So that's document workflows. What you?
Oh, I was just going to say it's a little the only downside of the draft versions is that unless you're really looking for it, it's not super obvious to users coming there who have edit ability to know that it's changed and not the published version. You really kind of have to dig to know that. And so I think it just, not that they can't do that or whatever, it just gives the, somebody reports, oh, I'm not seeing blah, blah, blah. And they go to the page and they're like, sure we are. And don't realize that it's just been changed by the,
I don't miss those days.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
I think in the old days, I agree that some of these things were great when they were used correctly, Derek, but I can't tell you how many sites I went into and would find 80% of the pages were never published, and the people who own them believed for years that everybody's been reading them. I think by keeping them separate, we're actually helping people. You have to, The other thing I see people doing that I'm not sure is more or less constructive, but is editing page content in a Word document, just because they're, that's easier to them to just sort of free flow in their team site, type stuff out, and then copying and pasting that into a page in the intranet site, whatever works basically, right? But just trying to keep it as clean and streamlined as possible is definitely a good goal.
Yeah, well, so we're having a conversation in the chat here too about the Mike Dixon brought up the fact that isn't the method for unpublishing to just republish the previous images version. Now you could I agree, you can technically do that, but it's pretty destructive, right? Because now you're overwriting the current version with that previous one. And so to get back to draft state, you would have to make a new draft version to take the situation, you know what I mean? So but it's pretty destructive and kind of.
It's all destructive.
If you've got people who can understand things like check in and check out and draft versions versus published versions, and they actually do that, awesome.
Yeah.
And we could have a cocktail party with those three people, and it would be really dull because it just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. In real life, it doesn't. I think the practitioners we're talking about who deeply understand this probably could make that work. I agree.
Heck, we don't
Mike.
do this right when we.
Yeah, it's a lot. I also wanted to just highlight, and Dan Tail has a comment that he uses PMP search and then assigns a different content type to content when he wants it published, which is really a fascinating sort of distributed content management system. So we've talked about this in previous episodes, like policy centers, where your policies are all stored in various collaboration, other intranet sites or other collaboration spaces, and using PMP Modern Search to just bring all that content together so that everybody can see it. Excuse me. Bring it together so that everybody can see it. And this idea of using a content type to say this is the published version, really interesting, sort of use the out of the box features, don't have to build anything to sort of make that happen. And I like it. It's very cool. You can also obviously have a property on the content types and just say this is the published one, and then have your Modern Search web heart filter for that, like use a refinable string and build it in. So there's a couple ways obviously to do that, but I love the idea of thinking about that as a way to publish content. One of the things we've been sort of talking about through all of this is the idea that that publishing step, that moving the content into sort of the view, everybody gets to view it workspace, is manual and or can be automated, as Derek was just mentioning, with Power Automate for sure. And when that's one library, maybe two libraries, I think that the Power Automate solution could absolutely work. I think where you get into a problem, and where we've ended up having to solve this with a custom solution before, is when you're talking about content across your entire tenant, right? Where you have certain document libraries or in multiple sites, and you need to be able to manage that publishing process across all of them. And I'm showing here where we can take a customization extensibility solution and build that process bespoke. And so this is an idea that we'd have a custom button in a list, or something else that would allow us to request that somebody review the content so that it could be approved. And then finally, that we could review and publish the content in the end. So the idea that we can go and look at what has happened to that content, who approved it, when they approved it, and then automate the moving, maybe even the PDFing, right? So if it's a Word document and you want to publish the PDF version, being able to automate creating that PDF and then moving it to the proper location based on whatever criteria you might have. You could also probably manage the fact that you would want it to have the same name in its destination location. So if the content had like a title, but the file name was different, because we know we can do that with a document item, the name of the document is not necessarily the title of the document. So if the title of the document was a thing, that title in that publishing step could probably say, okay, PDF this, make the name of the PDF the title field value plus .pdf, and then go put it in this location based on whatever criteria or however you wanted to automate that, and whatever business process you can come up with. So that's just some sort of the maturity level 500 that we've been trying to touch on every single episode in this series. Some resources as usual. Maturity model, an approval flow for the modern pages that Derek was talking about, and also obviously links to our partners ShareGate and Orchestry, who do some of this automation for you and can help you with these processes. Anyway, all right, so that brings us to the end. March 19th is our next episode, and we're going to do a session which is somewhat related to what we've been talking about, but I hesitate to call it a fifth version or of this or fourth version of this series. It really isn't. This is going to be about working together with OneDrive and SharePoint. So those two things working together when we have content in OneDrive, when we have content in SharePoint, and how we sort of work offline. That was sort of the impetus of this. That's a little tease there. How do we work with content in SharePoint libraries offline? So we're going to talk more deeply about all of those things. See us live, Microsoft 365 Community Conference in May. We have a discount code there for $150 off if you're interested in attending that. Mark, myself, and Derek will all be presenting, and Carrie will be there as well. So we would love to say hi to you if you are going. The European Collaboration Summit, that's in May as well, and Mark and Derek and myself will be there as well, and there's a discount code for that. And TechCon 365 Seattle, myself and Derek will be there. We have a discount code for that for some praxis. That's $100 off, Derek, is that correct? And that will be in June.
$100 for Seattle.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you again for everyone coming out today. We appreciate you being live and in the chat and having things be a little more lively. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Some Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.